Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Yes, I know there are a lot of mailbox stories on here, but I just learned this story from my dad involving my Uncle Dale, family friend who passed away a few months ago, and figured you guys would get a kick out of it. Years ago, back when Uncle Dale and Dad were university students, their engineering professor came to their class with a problem that needed solving. His mailbox was getting broken by someone driving by every night. He and his wife had put up something like 4 or 5 mailboxes, and all 4 or 5 times, the mailbox had been knocked over by someone driving a red truck. This professor offered extra credit to any group of students who could come up with a truck-proof mailbox that not only fit with city regulations, but was in a budget of $20, which back then was a good-sized chunk of change. Well, if anyone here knows anything about engineers, as Dad puts it, they love solving problems. And if it's engineering students, they will make it an experience to remember. Dad and Uncle Dale got together and got to work. They found a steel bar that fit within mailbox regulations. Posts have to be a specific height, width, and depth, and fill the inside with a mixture of concrete and steel rebars. Once the concrete had cured, they welded 8 rebars to the sides of the bar, bent them in half and stuck it inside a bucket. To add extra weight, they filled the bucket with the heaviest rocks they could find. As a finishing touch, they painted it brown and black to look like wood, and put the ugliest mailbox we could find on sale on top, welding it down for good measure. They brought this monstrosity into class, more dragged it because it was so heavy, and told the professor to bury the bucket where the mailbox stood. Since they were the first to turn in their project, the professor agreed to give it a try. That night, the professor and his wife were awoken by a metallic bang, followed by a lot of cursing. They went outside and wouldn't you know it, there was that red truck speeding away, the mailbox still standing, and at the base was a broken wooden baseball bat. 2 days later, the professor gets a bill in the mail for a hospital visit. Turns out, when the passenger hit the mailbox, he did some serious damage to his arm and shoulder. They were planning on suing the professor, but the professor hired a lawyer who basically told the plaintiffs, "You're just going to admit that you were vandalizing the mailbox multiple times?" That shut them up. To the best of my dad's knowledge, the mailbox is still standing. The other students who still brought him mailboxes had theirs gifted to different professors throughout the town and are also still standing. I have been living with multiple sclerosis for the past 10 years. It's a tough disease that affects my mobility and leaves me confined to a wheelchair. It is not easy dealing with the constant physical pain and fatigue, but I tried not to let it get the best of me. I have a full-time job, friends, and a loving family. I don't want to let my condition define me. I try to be as independent as I can, and I don't want to be seen as a burden. On this particular day, I decided to go grocery shopping at my local store. I parked in one of the designated handicapped spots and made my way inside. I made sure to grab everything I needed and then headed to the cashier to pay. As I was leaving the store with my groceries, an entitled lady called Karen approached me. "Excuse me," she said in a haughty tone, "but you're parked in a handicapped spot and I need it for my groceries." I looked up at her confused. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm handicapped. I use this spot." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she sneered. "You look perfectly fine to me. I bet you're just using that chair for the parking spot." I felt my anger rising. I've had to deal with this kind of attitude from people before, but it never gets any easier. I tried to stay calm though. "Ma'am," I said again, "I assure you I'm disabled, and even if I weren't, this spot is reserved for people with disabilities." She just scoffed. "I don't believe you," she said. "You're just lazy and trying to take advantage of the system." I could feel my face getting red with anger and frustration. I took a deep breath before responding, "Ma'am, I don't need to prove my disability to you or anyone else. And even if I did, it is none of your business. This spot is reserved for people like me, and I'm entitled to use it. She just glared at me for a moment before storming off, muttering curses under her breath. However, to my surprise, she came back with a few of her friends and they started to verbally attack me, using vulgar and offensive language. They made fun of my condition and even went as far as pushing my wheelchair. I felt humiliated, hurt, and angry. I couldn't believe that someone could be so cruel and disrespectful. Just when I was feeling the worst, a man and his girlfriend who happened to be nearby rushed to my aid. The woman tried to help me up while the man pulled out a gun and pointed it at Karen and her friends, ordering them to get on their knees, apologize to me for what they did, then run out of there before counting to 10 or else they will get shot. And that's exactly what they ended up doing in absolute terror. I was in shock and terrified myself, but at the same time, I felt a sense of gratitude towards them for standing up for me and defending me from Karen and her friends. The man approached me after Karen and her friends ran off. He helped me up and asked if I was okay. I thanked him and his girlfriend for their help. He then went back to his car with his girlfriend and they left. It is not fair that I have to deal with this kind of ignorance and prejudice just because of my disability, but I know that I will keep fighting for my rights, no matter how many Karens try to deny them to me. This incident made me realize that there are still good people out there who are willing to help and stand up for what's right, especially after I learned that the man who helped me was in fact a gang member that you didn't really want to mess with. I couldn't help but feel grateful for him and his girlfriend who came to my aid and put an end to Karen's unjust behavior. I knew that the experience would stay with me for a long time, but I also knew that it wouldn't defeat me. I would continue to live my life to the fullest and not let anyone's ignorance and prejudice bring me down. This was many years ago, when I was around 5. That would be 23 years ago. So it's more about my father instead. This does contain some mild vandalism, so here is hoping it doesn't get removed. My house was on a lower class side of town, mostly of more poor folks and retirees who had lived there before it went downhill. Our backyard butted right up against an alleyway that was a constant source of problems. As an example, we had a 15-foot diameter trampoline stolen from our backyard. This thing had been rusted together, so I can only figure they popped it up on its side and rolled it away like a big tire. Anyways, back to the story. The house across the alley from us was a duplex kind of thing, and the landlord would rent to literally anyone. One guy he rented to was a fairly prolific drug dealer who ran his gig literally out of his kitchen window. Cars would pull up through the alley into the yard/parking, hands would move back and forth, then the car would drive away. This guy legit had a drug drive-through. It didn't take long for my parents to find all kinds of undesirable trash migrating its way into our yard. Needles, burnt spoons, broken pipes, and who knows what else. My parents were worried about my dumb 5-year-old self getting into something or stabbing myself with something that could decidedly harm me. My mother was a nurse before being disabled in a severe car accident and had been infected with hepatitis C while working at the hospital due to a needle that had been missed. So she was super worried about this for me, as well as a handful of other kids in a neighborhood. Conversations with the landlord, including gathered evidence, made no difference. He didn't live there. Why did he care? Eventually, my parents tried to call the cops. The local PD was not helpful. They said they couldn't investigate or even send out a car on someone's word. This wasn't our first problem with the local cops either, after having our cars and other things broken into or stolen. They told my parents to write down license plate numbers, and if any matches a known felon or someone with a warrant, they would investigate. So my mother sat at the window for a full day and wrote down every plate she could see, hiding carefully the whole time. She ended the day with over 100 plates. That's how busy this guy was. We faxed the numbers along with a letter explaining that the numbers were for and who we had spoken with to the PD. Nothing happened. After several weeks, they called back and were told there were no matches of any kind. After another week of the problem simply getting worse, my dad decides to take matters into his own hands. One night with no moon, he sneaks into the driveway and throws roofing nails he had bought the previous day all over into their area. Hundreds of them. We watched for weeks as seemingly every tweaker in town would stop and almost immediately have to fix flats. Evidently, either business dwindled so much, or the renter figured out someone was messing with them. Both. And because of it, they finally moved. The landlord spent over 2 weeks having cleaning crews and the like over, throwing out huge amounts of garbage and repair crews to fix damage that I later found out was caused by the renter. They trashed and stripped the place before disappearing some night without us noticing. The moral here, not really one exactly, except for maybe the landlord. Be more selective who you let live in your house maybe. Edit. I should clarify the driveway was dirt, gravel, and tufts of grass, so these nails were not obvious and difficult to see, let alone pick up. My father specifically bought brown-colored ones. This one's a bit long, but please stick with me because it's a good one. So here is the basics. When I was a kid, my dad was in the service, US Navy, and so we moved around a lot. Because of this, I was always a new kid over and over again, meaning I was constantly the target of would-be bullies, and this made me fairly introverted and distrusting of other people by nature. In the waning years of my father's military career, he decides he would take his family back to his hometown and do some recruiting until he retired. So away we went to the family farm built by my great-grandfather. If anyone has ever found themselves moving to a small town suddenly, then you are well aware of what I mean when I say that the locals were very small town minded. For those of you who don't know, the small town mentality is basically this: if you're not from there, born and raised, then you don't belong there. A lot of small town citizens are closed off and want nothing to do with outsiders. So there I was, not only the new kid, but introverted and an outsider, bully magnet. For the most part, I tried not to let it get to me, but I did have some bad days and got into a few fights. Always in self-defense though. And eventually, as people grew up, most of the other kids matured out of trying to be a bully and began to just leave me alone, especially once they found out who my great-grandfather was. Something about one of the 4 founding families. I don't know, I never really cared that much, and besides, those people had shown their true colors by treating me like crap for years by that point. But that's a different story. This story is about a kid we will call Mike. You see, Mike was the only one who never seemed to grow out of trying to be a bully. He would daily track me down and tell me how worthless I was, that I was just some dumb farm boy who would never amount to anything and would always be a loser. He would walk up to me randomly and say things like, "I know you're going to be the one who shoots up the school someday, and when it ends with your suicide, I'll be the one cheering." At one point, I arrived at school to find he had painted the combination on my locker with toothpaste, and a lot of weird stuff like that. Anyways, we get into our senior year of high school, and I've long since been doing my best to ignore him. His not being able to get a reaction out of me seemed to really upset him, and even his friends started saying his seeming need to find me every day to simply be a jerk was bordering on the creepy and the obsessive. And then all of a sudden the verbal abuse stopped one day, a couple of months from graduation. I assumed he had finally just given up, but that was not the case. A couple weeks later, I walked to the end of our long driveway to catch the bus and found that our mailbox had been run over. I didn't think anything of it at the time other than it must have been some drunk. I get home later that afternoon, take some photos of the damage just in case, and then fix the mailbox. A new wooden post buried onto the ground. I finished my other chores and homework and relaxed the rest of the evening. Next morning, I go to catch the school bus and the mailbox has again been run over. I get home, take photos, repair it, do chores, homework, and relax. It happened again the next day, and again the day after that. This went on for 2 weeks, only stopping on a weekend. My parents had reported the smashing of the mailbox, but there was no evidence as to who the culprit even was, so nothing was even done about it. I finally had enough of digging out broken posts and replacing them, and so, the revenge. I get up early on a Saturday and head to the end of the driveway. I dug a 2 feet by 2 feet wide hole 6 feet straight down and filled the hole with fresh cement. And in the center placed the 10-foot section of the old farmhouse original cast iron water pipes, sunk 6 feet into the concrete. I filled the rest of the 10 feet cast iron pipe with concrete as well and mounted the mailbox on the top. Mind you, I looked into how far from the road the mailbox needed to be for safety reasons and attached ample amounts of reflectors. Monday morning comes and I notice the mailbox post has all sorts of scratches on it, but otherwise it's fine. I get to my final class of the day, creative writing, and I'm in the middle of a story outline for that week's project when a friend of Mike's come in. We will call him Steve. Steve sees me and freaks out. "Do you have any idea what you did to Mike's car?" I didn't do anything to Mike's car. I don't even know what it looks like. "Your little stunt with the mailbox totaled it. He had to get it towed into town at 5 a.m. this morning. It's a small town. Auto garage is definitely closed at 5 a.m. He's gonna sue the frunk out of you." Okay, but you are aware that deliberately hitting and/or damaging a mailbox is a federal crime, right? What are you talking about? You don't actually own your mailbox. Legally, it belongs to the post office, so destroying a mailbox is destroying government property, making it a federal offense. So what? You will get a little fine, but you are going to pay. Oh no. It's actually a $250,000 fine, or up to 3 years in prison per offense for vandalizing a mailbox. And since it happened 10 times in the last 2 weeks, that translates to either $2.5 million fine or up to 30 years in prison. Steve just stares at me for a moment and storms out. At that point, I pull up the federal statute on the computer I was working on, and Mike comes in insisting that I'm making that thing up. So I show him the law, and he freezes. I tell him, "You can take me to court and I might have to pay a small fine, or maybe even tear down the mailbox, but your life will be over." "Maybe, but you can't prove I did it 10 times. Actually, I took photos of the damage so I can prove it was at least 10 times. But even if I couldn't, $250,000 is still a lot of money. Much more than your car is worth, I'm sure. Would you really bankrupt yourself or even get yourself sent to prison to force me to pay you $1 grand or $2 for the car?" Mike stormed out of the classroom and never bothered me again. The best part was actually the domino effect this created. You see, Mike didn't have enough credits to graduate on time. Wasted too much time trying to be a Dr. Phil case, I guess. I heard through that small-town grapevine that he was eventually shunted over to adult programs by the school. Without his car, which was totaled, and unable to afford another, his mother bought the first one and refused to buy a second when she found out how he totaled it. He couldn't get to his classes and was eventually tossed out of school due to attendance problems. Without a diploma or GED, he couldn't get into even a community college nor find proper work. Not having access to gainful employment left him living with his mother in a trailer, living off her and the occasional odd job he gets. Meanwhile, I am now married with a child and living in a beautiful subtropical Algarve in the south of Portugal in Europe. Mike, if you're out there reading this, I only have one real question. Just how did that mailbox taste? And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.